Of the Council for May 2020. My name is Councillor Margaret Thomas, and as Mayor I will be chairing this meeting. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on and share the message of the Elders. Kaya Kaya Burdias, Marman Yoks Kulanga, Nuna de Mort, Nitcha Kulan Nalamaya Kalamunda Budja, Yayi, Nandurapan, Wajulas Kulan, Jina, Nuna Danicha, Nunga Budja, Nunga Burdias Kura, Yayi, Burda Burda, Kedalak, Burda, Kaya, Yunga. Hello, welcome to our leaders, men, women and children who have come to our place today, this evening, and I'm happy to see you all standing on Noongar land of their leaders, past, present and future. Thank you. The operations of Council and the agenda for this meeting are governed by the provisions of the Local Government Act, standing orders and rules of conduct. All matters of business listed in the agenda will be dealt with as separate decisions of Council. Thank you for your attendance and interest. Are there any apologies?
Through the Chair, no apologies, but we do have a leave of absence previously or to be approved for Councillor Boyd.
Thank you. Public question time. Are there any questions? No. We'll move on to deputations, and we have a deputation from Mr. Peter Forrest, and we will ask him to come forward. And Mr. Forrest, you know the drill, so you have 10 minutes and please give your name and address.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, councillors and staff and members of the public. My name is Peter Forrest, 36 Panoramic Terrace, Kalamunda. I refer to agenda item 10.5.8, which is an overview of community engagement for 2019. And I've got to apologise already to Nicole because she just told me she wrote it. In summary, I propose to draw attention to lessons that can be learned from reading this overview and highlight some negative trends from it, then propose changes in the context of some very recent events. Surprisingly, this lengthy 64-page attachment to the agenda is listed by the City Administration as for councillors only to note, whereas I suggest that community engagement is surely a matter of such importance that councillors need to do much more than simply note what is going on, since as our elected representatives, interactive engagement with community is surely a vital part of councillors' role. On the fundamentals, community collectively pay through rates to fund this whole business. And yes, it is a business, a large business, and has the supreme luxury of having captive rate-paying clientele. Councillors as a board of management, effectively, elected by the community, are expected to be aware of rapidly changing living circumstances of individuals and families in this overall community and to guide policies and practices of the executive administration. However, this review report exposes various facts. One, just how far this local authority has expanded away from its core provision of basic services such as roads, footpaths, street lighting, rubbish disposal, parks and maintenance. Now does many other things. Secondly, councillors are viewed as bystanders, but have no means of independently testing whether priorities and expenditure align with those of the electorate. Thirdly, councillors, I believe, need to have more independently sourced information to be able to evaluate priorities initiated by city staff, who each have their own internal and often personal view on priorities. Next, we in the community note that the city has a creative active citizen plan that talks about at length empowering citizens. Surely then that should be reflected in a community engagement review, but it's not really there at all. Fourth, we in the community note that the city has this overall business seems to have gradually accumulated a top-down management style that is inadequately networked with its clients and with a clear predominance of informing over asking and listening. This report even numerically scores informed users and aware users of what are almost all staff-initiated projects. It almost seems that ratepayers see engagement as a test of who is listening to them, rather than them learning about community needs and values related to their projects. Next, community participation in workshops should gather people's thoughts and aspirations for the future, not seek to freeze them into models devised by others. The electronic online dominated means of communication with this electorate is a completely inadequate means of engaging with the community, who vary widely in age, and many are not habitual users of computers, and even when supplemented with occasional information distributed at events. This overview paper then is really only a staff record of conversations scored by staff themselves on numbers of persons informed of each staff-initiated project and engaged in accepting staff proposals as the only available option. But at least it should trigger Council to reconsider community engagement in Kalamunda, perhaps. In practice, electors do note there is often obvious reluctance of city staff to accept that community may have fundamentally different perspectives, yet frequently alternative views and values are marked down as controversial, then often frequently result in alienation. This brings us naturally to development planning that incurs a high proportion of city operational expenditure. Local social needs and circumstances, as well as sense of place, on-site, environmental and economic values of residents are all expected to be fully understood in responding to broad guidance from the Planning Commission. However, this week, after the announcement by the Premier of outcomes from a 3-year review of the planning system, councils will now be expected to collaborate by drastically reducing red tape, meaning avoidable bureaucracy, and to interact with and speak for ratepayers. Speak for ratepayers. To quote Premier McGowan, these are once-in-a-lifetime changes to the development approval system. All but very large multi-million-dollar developments will henceforth go directly to the Planning Commission for approval, notionally that is for 18 months to assist economic recovery from the COVID virus emergency, but it doesn't take long to work out that these changes are most likely intended to be long-term, since State Parliament is already on notice to change planning legislation. In fact, there was a debate in the House, has been a debate briefly in the House already. Furthermore, importantly, this planning reform has very specifically highlighted improving community engagement as a major aspect of planning reform. Local authorities will obviously need to cooperate, hence the manner in which this city and council relate to the community in Kalamunda will now need to be, unfortunately, or fortunately, thoroughly overhauled. Finally, to facilitate more genuine engagement, I do request Council to reactivate as soon as feasible something broadly similar to the monthly public agenda briefing forums, but also try to utilise those public meetings as a means to improve community engagement rather than only to hear staff explain their proposals. Thank you very much.
Could I get an officer comment on this deputation, please?
Thank you, through the chair. Could I ask the Manager of Customer and PR, would you like to give a response?
No problem at all. Thank you very much, Mr. Forrest, for your observations there. There's probably just a couple of things that I would note, predominantly for your information more than anything else. The community engagement overview is designed to provide Council with a high-level overview of all community engagement undertaken over an annual calendar year, and it does compare results of 2019 to 2018. Each of the reports though, and I'll take for example on page 11 of the report or page 241 of the agenda, there's a list of the engagement projects, and you will note as someone who comes along to council very regularly that each of these projects are actually not projects that have been initiated by officers. They're actually projects that have came about as a response to requests either from advisory committees or from council to undertake projects that do require an element of community engagement, and every single one of those projects would also have an engagement report. So when it came back to council, and I'll use the example, the one at the top is the Name Your Suburb competition that was undertaken in 2019. The results of that engagement then come back to council as a full report on that particular matter and the feedback from community. I won't give examples for each one, but it is the case across all of those. So I also just wanted to provide everyone with a little bit of context in terms of what it means if we are informing or if someone is an informed user. It is absolutely not that we are looking for people to only be informed. The City of Kalamunda sets objectives for all of our community engagement campaigns, and we look across a range of spectrums. So we're looking to raise awareness of projects, and when we're looking to raise an awareness of a project, we would be looking to ensure that a user was informed. So for example, that a community member knows that there is public comment on a particular topic, or they're aware that the council has released a strategy that they're asking for feedback on. So that someone would therefore be categorised for the purpose of this report as being informed because they had, for example, downloaded one of our documents or they had attended an information session. Additional to that, you'll note we use references such as aware or engaged. So they also relate back to our objectives. So for example, an engaged user will have achieved the completion of a survey or a feedback form, and therefore we've actually created a behavioural change in which we've been wanting people to provide us feedback, and they have. So I just wanted to clarify that, because in a lot of the cases someone will be both informed and then hopefully engaged as well if they've taken that next step, as you do, and I would consider you one of our highly engaged residents, in actually providing us with feedback. The only other comment I would make is in relation to the Active Citizens Plan. So the engagement report is designed to provide feedback in relation to projects that we have actually consulted on. The team will actually provide a separate report that is based on the outcomes of us achieving our strategies, and all of the community engagement that is actually based on things like the strategic community plan and the annual business plan in terms of projects that the city has looked to deliver. And I'm extremely pleased with the results at an officer point of view, because we've continued to see an increase in engagement. At one point, this council would have been in a position where they would have published an advert in a local paper in relation to a notice per se and invited a letter, perhaps had one or two comments in relation to that, and we've gone to a position where we have large numbers of people attending community workshops outside of a COVID environment, along with a significant amount of online engagement and opportunities for anyone who doesn't like to use technology. Every single one of our engagement activities includes both traditional and new technologies and the ability for hard copy surveys, etc.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any questions for either Mr Forrest or the Manager of Customer Services? Councillor Stallard.
Thank you, through the Chair. For Mr Forrest, I noticed you mentioned the Premier said reduce red tape. I was just wondering if you could explain again in the capacity of when you were talking about multi-million dollar applications, what were you referring to in there and what were you suggesting with that comment?
These are projects which are extremely large, that you wouldn't see many of them, if any, in Kalamunda. But only those they're being excluded, go directly to the rest, or go directly to the Planning Commission. I must say, if there's plenty of information, I think there's quite a bit of information being published already about it, but there's still elements of it really quite vague. But the Premier making such an issue, a once in a lifetime change and that kind of thing, it's obvious that there's intention to make major reforms, and basically the bits I summarised relate to what I understand would be expected of councils.
a follow-up question, if I may. So do you perceive that in this situation, taking council out of the equation would be a better and a step forward if there's no input or contribution coming from councillors who are at the coalfront?
Well, it seemed to me that councillors are not going to be in a position which I think has embarrassed most of you, where you're sitting in quasi-judicial role looking at planning applications. In other words, you have to make a decision on that. The planning commission can overrule them later, but nevertheless you feel yourselves handicapped. I've noticed, for instance, Wattle Grove South, members would not go and talk to local residents down there because of that particular. It was seen that councils couldn't prejudice their role by going and talking to residents when they might be in a position of making a judgment on them. That, I think, is going to disappear. It looks like it will all disappear. And perhaps the only thing that won't disappear is there would have to still be surely building approval, even if the rest of it disappears. But I guess they'll come round to working out what local authorities will be asked to do, because, well, that's the way the Planning Commission and the Department of Local Government Planning have operated.
Councillors, Councillor Sewell, you have a question?
Thank you. Just through the chair, in light of Mr Forrest's comments, perhaps we can have a report back from the relevant director as to how these changes will be implemented and the implications for the City of Kalamunda. I'm just concerned that people are live streaming and perhaps it's causing some level of confusion about what actually is proposed. If we could get that clarity, that would be great.
Through the chair, thank you for your query, Councillor Saul. The City is currently assessing what impacts these planning reforms will have on the City's planning functions, and there will be a presentation provided to Council over the coming weeks. The City is in the process of reviewing that and what impacts it has, and some preliminary advice has been provided to Councillor O'Donnell, who has been working through some issues with Walga in relation to these announcements. They are fresh announcements and the industry is grappling with what impacts it will have. And Mr Forrest has alluded to there are some aspects that are a little bit vague, and we're seeking some clarity from the state government on those aspects.
Are there any other questions? Thank you very much.
Can I just respond to Nicole's comments, Manager?
No, I don't think so,
All right.
Mr Price. We need to move on.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you very much for your deputation.
Thank you.
Applications for leave of absence, CEO.
Yes, through the chair, if Councillor Boyd is asking for leave, that will need a mover and a seconder.
Can I have a mover? Councillor O'Donnell, and seconded by Councillor Blair. All in favour? Thank you very much. That's carried unanimously, and that is why Councillor Boyd is not here tonight. We move on to the minutes of the Ordinary Council meeting of the 28th of April. Can I have a mover, please, that these minutes be confirmed? Councillor Ritchie, seconded by Councillor Stallard. All in favour? Carried unanimously. On the basis of the above motion, I now sign the minutes as a true and accurate record of the meeting of the 28th of April 2020. There are no announcements by the member presiding without discussion. Point 8, matters for which the meeting may be closed. Councillors, when we come to these items, if you want to ask a question about in the confidential attachments, we will need to close the meeting. Otherwise, you can ask questions about what's in the main report. Disclosure of interest, are there any?
Through the chair, I've not received any officially.
Thank you. Reports to Council. The first report regarding Varley Street has been withdrawn at the request of the applicant. So we move on to 10.1.2, proposed home business, gunsmith and engineering services. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor O'Donnell.
I think it's sort of half a question, half a observation. When we look at the objections, I can't help but note how much, I guess, fear and worry over what they believe these applications to be are. And I'm just wondering if there's any sort of foresight, if something like this was to happen again, that potentially we could provide some sort of very simple worksheet about what people are and aren't going to do, which may alleviate some of these concerns and the multitude of objections for things that aren't actually going to be valid planning concerns because they're not actually, that those fears are not going to be valid.
Would you like to respond?
Through the Chair, thank you for your query, Councillor O'Donnell. The City is able to provide small explanations based on the information contained within the proposed development application as part of referral letters, and we'll take that that recommendation on board for any future applications that may be of a contentious nature similar to this.
Councillor Giardini, you have a question?
Happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Just before we do that, are there any other questions? Councillor Blair, a question?
I just had a quick question about the opening times from 9 until 1 in the afternoon. I was just wondering why they would be open for such a short amount of time.
Director, do you have any comment?
Through the Chair, that's the information that was put forward by the applicant. I don't have any details specifically around the reasoning for that time.
Yep, thanks.
Are there any other questions? We have a mover, Councillor Giardina. Do we have a seconder, Councillor Blair? Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion, which is on page 17. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. 10.1.3, Omnibus Amendment to Local Planning Policy. Councillors, you'll see that Councillor O'Connor has a amended officer recommendation with a little bit more information, but before we go to that, are there any questions? Councillor O'Connor, can I just ask you to outline why you want to make this slight change?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. The intent of the amendment is to provide Council with some clarity about how the discretion will be applied and by whom and by what level of officer will be providing the oversight when discretion is used. Simple as that.
Thank you. I will go back to the officer recommendation without that amendment. Is there anyone wishes to move that who's unhappy with Councillor O'Connor's amendment? No? Then may I have a seconder for the amended officer recommendation? Councillor Giardina. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor O'Connor. 10.1.4, the City of Gosnell's proposed operations centre. Are there any questions? No questions. The officer recommendation is on page 33. Do I have a mover? Councillor O'Donnell, seconded by Councillor Sewell. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We have no asset services reports or corporate services reports, so we move on to 10.4.1, the National Redress Scheme. Are there any questions? Do I have a mover? Councillor Sewell, seconded by Councillor O'Donnell. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion, which is on page 43. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 10.4.2, Customer Service Review. Are there any questions? Councillor O'Donnell.
I think it's one of those question observations again. When I was looking at the page, sorry, I'm just finding the page 8 or 238, I noticed that we obviously, for a lot of the projects, we had quite a lot of visitors, but the responses, for whatever reason, for one, two, so potentially 1,500 people, for whatever reason, didn't choose to go and do the surveys, but they visited, and I just wondered if there were potentially issues that may prevent people. I mean, I know that we have the online survey, you have to register and give your email, which some people, I know that some people find that a bit of a barrier. I just wondered if that had much thought about it.
Manager of Customer Services, please.
I am happy to take the question now, but this is the customer service review report, and I think that one is coming up in just a couple of reports' time. Would you like me to take the question now?
You can just hold it until then. Sorry, I thought I was too quick. Sorry about that.
All good.
Are there any other questions about customer service? Councillor Stallard.
Talking to some people who had properties down in the southwest, I think it was in Manjimup, and the gentleman often referred to the fact that there was a program where at any time of the day or night they could go online and look at any applications that they may have put in, or people have put in, one's linked to them with their access code, to be able to find it, locate it, and find where it's at and what's happening with it. Do we intend to develop a similar program so people can go online at any time and find where their applications are at any given time of the day or month?
Which director would like to take that question?
Just clarification, application for planning? You're talking about
Yes,
planning
in
applications?
particular
Yeah.
planning, but it's starting to go more widespread and develop into other aspects of council life or city life.
Okay. No, yes, manager? Okay.
Fantastic question, thanks Councillor Stallard, because at the moment we're just looking at a proof of concept to develop a customer relationship management system, and I would expect that that will be something that Manjimup would be utilising. It actually further increases the amount of online services. We would need to determine exactly what, because when it comes to planning and building, there's also a number of applications that are lodged via the state, and you can currently lodge an online planning application through the City of Kalamunda website right now. But the idea of the new customer relationship management system, should it reach full potential, obviously subject to further budget deliberations as well, is that people will be able to do a lot more than themselves, including tracking where things are at, closing off or finding out what's happened to their customer requests, and also updating their own details, for example, should they change address and some simple things like that. So it's certainly something that we are currently investigating.
Thank you, Manager. Are there any other questions? If not, the officer recommendation is on page 54. Do I have a mover? Councillor Sewell, seconded by Councillor Cooper. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Giardina. Councillor Bilic, you in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. We move on to 10.5.1, the draft monthly financial statements. Are there any questions? The officer recommendation is on page 62. Do I have a mover? I'm happy to move this. Councillor Thomas, seconded by Councillor O'Connor. Is there going to be are there any questions or debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. 10.5.2, councillors, you all have a copy of responses to questions by Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Stallard and Councillor O'Connor, and I thank those councillors for giving our officers time to answer the question and for passing them on to all councillors. Are there any other questions? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just follow up on question 6 of my questions and requesting more information about the cleaning and supplying of consumables for various city locations. I was seeking further clarity about that from the director.
For your question 6?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yes.
Through the chair, we'll take that one on
Director.
notice.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Stallard?
Thank you. I had 2 other sections to the question which had been asked by Councillor Ritchie and in part was answered. That was the Hayes Special Recruitment Australia. But I also noted 2 other aspects to that. There was the industrial partners for hire temporary staff and admin, and there was another group. I'm just trying to find which ones they were. The Glen Flood Group, was it? Yes, the Glen Flood Group. I'm just wondering, are they fitting the same category and the same answers for the Hay Group? Thank you.
Director? Director of Asset Services, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, the engagement of the Glen Flood Group is basically providing technical consultancy support for ad hoc works on a fixed basis. For example, a landscape architect to undertake the Hay Street design and or playground designs. So it's not labour per se, as in blue-collar staff working in the field. These are consultancies on their working from the Glen Flood Group on that basis for distinct projects.
Other questions? May I have a mover for the officer recommendation on page 69? Councillor Stallard, seconded by Councillor O'Connor. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Rates debtors report for the period ended April 2020. Are there any questions? I would like a mover for the officer recommendation on page 74. Councillor Stallard, seconded by Councillor Blair. There's not going to be any debate. I'll put this motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Corporate Business Plan, quarterly update, January to March. Are there any questions? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got one question for the Director of Development Services. Item 1.2.1 of the Corporate Business Plan references a review being undertaken of the bushfire management or readiness program. And my question is, has there been any consideration for providing more resources to pre-inspections prior to the official fire season? Thank you.
Director.
Through the chair, thank you for your query, Councillor O'Connor. Yes, there has been a consideration of further resources to assist with possibly undertaking some pre-inspections before the official season commences. The city staff are currently working through a comprehensive presentation on a post-season briefing with the outcomes of the most recent season, looking at any issues that came about through that season, looking at the positives of the season and matters to be considered and addressed for next season. That's envisaged to be presented to Council at a strategy session in July.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Sewell.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the review of the bushfire management, I was wondering if there had been any consideration in terms of KIAC and any consultation with KIAC to look at alternative methods of burning. I'm aware that many residents have raised concerns about the way in which burnouts are conducted both at a local and state government level, and whether any alternatives such as, I think it's called mosaic burning, or in line with Indigenous methods, whether that's something that's worth considering.
Director.
Through the chair, once that director's commented, can I also get a comment from Mr Jackson, please?
Through the chair, I was going to defer to Mr Jackson as it relates.
We will ask for a director of
mosaic
asset.
burns and such primarily relate to the city assets that are managed through the bushfire management team, so I'll refer that to Director.
Thank you. Through the chair, and thank you, Director of Development Services. Fine pass. The matter of mosaic burning and or Aboriginal burning has been raised with our team, and it's something we are going to explore and consider once we reactivate KIAC.
Councillor Stella, do you have a question?
Further question along those lines to the Director. One of the things I've noticed is that some of the reserves, even though they have been burnt, like next to our place, it's been once since I've been there for a few years, like 30 or 40 years. And I'm just wondering, is there potential to look at some of these reserves and have a more frequent burning or fire control for some of those reserves, even if we somehow incorporate and assist in the training for our local brigades to take part in that? I'm just wondering if there's a possibility, or is that an expensive exercise?
Thank you. Through the Chair, and thank you for the question. Council may recall late last year we delivered the bushfire mitigation plan for the city, which was endorsed by the Office of Bushfire Risk Management. It's a risk-based approach to fire management in our parks and reserves and our open spaces, and burning is not always the first and only solution. So we're embarking now on management plans for all our public open spaces in terms of the bushfire mitigation management plan that's being developed, and as that's rolled out we can implement those things. It's always, of course, the highest risk gets addressed first. And the other thing, of course, is that, as Council noted last time, we're being able now to avail ourselves of grant funding from through the Fire Emergency Services Levy to improve our fire breaks in public spaces, and we're progressing through the April round of funding grants now.
Councillors, are there any more questions? If not, may I have a mover for the officer recommendation on page 78, Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Sewell. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move on to 10.5.5, differential rates. Are there any questions? If not, I will ask for a mover for the officer recommendation on page 90. Do I have a mover? I'm happy to move. Councillor Thomas, seconded by Councillor Stallard. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move on to the proposed MRS amendment for Lot 912 Midland Road, Bushmead. Are there any questions? The officer recommendation is on page 101. Do I have a mover? Councillor Cooper, seconder. Councillor Blair. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. 10.5.7, I just remind you, you can only ask questions about the main report, not the confidential attachment. Are there any questions? If not, I'll ask for a mover for the officer recommendation on page 106. Councillor Ritchie, seconded by Councillor Cannon. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Now we move on to 10.5.8, and we've had a question from Councillor O'Donnell, and I will ask the Manager of Customer Service, do you wish to respond to that question?
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Donnell, through the Chair. From memory, the question was ultimately in relation to the number of visitors or people that had downloaded a document or reviewed information in comparison to the numbers of submissions. Can I just confirm? Yeah. Awesome. So you are correct, and it is something that we're always very aware of in actual fact. So generally speaking, when we set objectives for a much higher percentage to be aware than those that we expect will actually convert into submissions. There's a number of reasons for that, but predominantly it's because somebody might be interested enough to want to have a bit of a read and get more information, but they may not feel compelled to provide feedback unless they have a particular interest in that area or unless they have a particular concern in actual fact. So there's some theory that suggests that people are more likely to make comment when they're concerned about something compared to when they're quite comfortable with it, and it's something we are always grappling with. And I often say to people, look, even if you like it, still please put in a submission and tell us the things that you like about it. But the other point that I would like to note is that in terms of the engaged visitors, we had a 1,000% increase in terms of visits to the engaged site, so that's 1,000 additional, from 27k to 28k. But we had a 400 increase in actual survey responses from 1.3k up to 1.7k. So in 2019 we did actually see a relatively good increase in numbers of survey submissions in comparison to the additional number of views. We also do continue to offer the hard copy surveys, and you'll probably recall there were a number of projects that council really wanted to ensure there was a high degree of awareness regarding that. We did letterbox drops to all households that we could via IVES, which is, some of you may recall, being referred to as CellMat previously. They've just changed their name. So we will always continue to do that. So they'll come up in an engaged visitor stat because they will have completed a survey, but we will do the data entry for them, and we're always up for ideas to make it as easy as possible. We do ask for a sign-in on Engage, and it's because otherwise we can run the risk of having people try to jeopardise survey results ultimately, and just blocking IPs, which used to be one of the solutions, so we could say only one submission per IP address, doesn't actually work, because that can stop, for example, if you've got multiple people living in a house using the same internet, from actually being able to make a submission. So they're all things we have to take into account. We do allow people to sign in using their Facebook details or sign in using other methods if they don't want to do the full registration, and we're hopeful that it'll just continue to grow as the trend appears to be showcased.
Are there any other questions, councillors, on community engagement? If not, I will ask for a mover for the officer recommendation on page 111, Councillor Sewell, seconded by Councillor Giardina. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. There are no motions of which previous notice has been given. Councillors, do you have any questions by members without notice? Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was delighted to note that we received something in excess of $700,000 from the federal government COVID recovery plan, and I did note that we had put in a submission earlier on when we were asked for what we might like. I'm wondering if we could give a quick overview of some of the things that we had included in that $700,000 to give us an idea of what's out there. Thanks.
Director of Development Services, would you like to do that? And the amount was...
Pass it again.
Director of Asset Services, I just want to say that the amount was $760,081, and I would like to know why the $81. Director of Asset Services.
Thank you. Through the Chair, earlier this year, the federal government asked for a list of essentially shovel-ready projects in the infrastructure space, roads and public infrastructure, that could be delivered in a 3 to 6 month period. We provided a submission of 10 projects that had progressed design and were going to be listed on our draft 19-20-21 Capital Works program. So the projects we wanted to proceed with in the space of basically road resurfacing, street light replacements in some areas and similar works. They totaled $775,000. So we received advice that we received $760,081. We are now awaiting from the Commonwealth the formal advice as to how that funding is to be used. Is it for those specific projects and or otherwise, until we understand essentially the rules of the game. we can't reflect upon what we were going to do. I might add, of those 10 projects that we listed for submission for funding, 8 of them Council decided to list in the draft capital works budget for consideration for budget time. 2 of those they deferred to 21-22. Again, so I go back, if we find out the rules of the game, then we can advise how the money can be dispersed and what happens to what notional municipal funding we already attached to the draft budget for those items.
Thank you, Director. Are there any other questions by members without notice? Councillor Sewell, and then I'll go to you, Councillor Stallard.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if it would be possible to get an update in terms of what services, for the people playing at home, what services are currently available under the new phase of the lifting of restrictions. So what services are currently being provided, what aren't, and what we're looking at getting online in the near future, and if that can't be answered now, if that can be taken on notice, or if we could develop some kind of communication strategy, please.
CEO, would you like to respond to that?
We're working through those matters in the Recovery Committee. So we'll meet tomorrow and we'll bring back some information through the CIB on Friday with an outline of where we're heading for stage 2 implementation. And obviously it looks like that stage 3 or phase 3 restrictions are coming pretty soon, close behind. So we'll give you some update at the end of the week once we've got our heads around it, if you don't mind, Councillor. Thank you.
Councillor Stallard, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, through the Chair. Does that mean, through the Director, that that we in Council can now sit back and start getting our budgetary requirements together again and come back to you for some additional projects?
Through the Chair, thank you, Councillor Stallard, for that. As I said, until such time as I receive formal advice from the Commonwealth as to how that $760,000 can be deployed, I have to take that question on notice.
Final chance, councillors. Is any Councillor Blair, you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick question on Stoke Park. I visited Stoke Park on the weekend and had a look at the baffle system in action with a fair bit of water running through it. Looked great. We've had a resident send in an email just asking, well, saying that we've done a very good job as well, and asking what are the next steps coming up for Stoke Park.
Who would like to give an update on Stoke Park?
Thank you. Through the Chair, I think I can field this. The next set of steps for Stoke Park is we're finalising the concept plans for the playground and skate park, and the intent was to bring a report to Council with an indicative cost for those elements, to have them endorsed by Council such that we can try and advocate for grant funding to support the construction of those projects. That would be backed up by the completion of what's being undertaken in a hydrology study to understand what's happening with surface and subsurface water in Stoke Park.
Thank you. Last chance, councillors. Any other questions? No. There are no questions by members of which due notice has been given, and there's no urgent business approved by the presiding member. So we will close this meeting at 7:19. Thank you very much, councillors.